My next step here, I just had performed it, and then rather than demonstrate, I'm just going to explain it real quick. All that I did to make water was to go in and create a plane. Let's change this back to wireframe. I created a plane in my scene that's slightly below the ground plane, and what happens is that it's very hard to see in this viewport because the water material I used, I went in, selected a slot, and I used an architectural. If you go into materials, see architectural. You double click on that, and that gives you some templates, and the template at the very bottom is called water. And it's a little bit easier to work with than the architectural and design water. You can adjust the colors of your water, so you want to put a little bit of blue in there. That helps. And this material's already got everything it needs, so it has the reflective properties and bump. But you could put some noise onto this plane. Maybe I'll go in and add 100 segments here, and then add a little bit of noise. Or you could even animate it so there was a little bit of wave in there. But let's just put a little bit of noise, fractal, and then the Z. That makes it slightly bumpier. Now, again, when I do my render, you will see that the water has a little bit of a water texture in there. You can see the rocks underneath, so it's sort of like a stream, and it follows along pretty neatly. So that is really an option for you. You don't have to put water in your scene, but it is a nice touch. And if you find that any of these parts here are interfering with the way your water flows, just go in and edit mesh and drop those vertices down, and then it'll fill in nice and neat. We have terrain, and we could make a series of rock formations along here if we wanted. One of the neat tricks that I have learned here is, how do you make a rock? Well, that's a very simple procedure here. Extended Primitives, chamfer box. I'll zoom way in here, and in fact, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to hide the dome here, just so it's easier to work. But I'm going to make a chamfer box with some segments. We'll do a quick look here. Maybe throw in 3 and 3. The more segments you have, the more rockier. Now we still have some more options here. Real quick, edit mesh. Go in and select just some parts of the rock and kind of give it a little bit of a unique shape to it. And throw some of the sections up. Throw them over here. Do a little rotate. Get some uniqueness there. For the most part, you're just kind of doing a base mesh. Again, you're not too worried about extreme detail here. Let's move it so we can get up above the surface here and see it. And I'm going to change my to my perspective view just so I can kind of navigate over there real quick. We'll even make it bigger just for the heck of it. Now we can also add noise to it. Fractal, a little bit in the Z, a little bit in the X. You could also add a displacement map to it. Come down to displace. Under map, you hit none, and we can use noise there. Increase the strength. Decay. It's not planar. We want to do cylindrical or spherical, depending on your preference. But for the most part, we have a rock. And we can go out and bring in a simple rock material. I'll go out to Maps, Bitmap. Underneath my maps, I have a section here for rocks. Grab that rock texture there. Can also add the bump to that. Go back out to its bump category. And there I have the rock bump, which is a black and white contrasting version. By increasing my bump amount, that's going to give it a rougher look. Drag that over there. Make it visible in the viewport. May have to UV map it to kind of give it the right look. Right now, again, it's planar. Box is kind of, we could go with shrink wrap, would probably work. There we go, that's not too bad. And we can also hit the fit button. So we have a rock. And the neat thing here is that we can go ahead and clone that rock. But the problem is here we have two rocks that look alike. We could rotate it a little bit. We could scale it a little bit. But we can also go back into its noise properties, and where you see the word seed, change that number to any number you want. Now what it might do is it might move it off axis a little bit because of the displace modifier, but for the most part, what you're going to see is it changes the shape of your rock without having to go through and create all those extra features. Seed is a uniqueness factor. And majority of things that you will work with in the next couple of weeks have the seed property, which will allow you to make multiple clones without having to keep changing each one individually. Now, there is another cool feature here. What if we wanted to make a series of rocks along a given area? And this can get kind of tricky, so I don't want to confuse you too much, but let's say we wanted to have rocks along the bank here. What I could do is simply go and create a very basic shape. And I'm going to go into the smooth and highlights here, and I'll maximize this view. And this is more of just a placement. You can't see it because it's below the surface, but for the most part, I'm going to go ahead and click. And this shape, I'm going to give it just a little extrusion. Now this is going to be a guide for me, and the reason why I'm doing this, I don't want it to be visible. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this rock, I'm going to place it over here onto that hidden object below, and I'm going to use a new compound object called scatter. What scatter lets you do is take one object and clone it amount of times over a given object. So the distribution object will be that surface piece. If I can get in there and find it. That's the distribution piece. Now what you can notice is there's only one rock there. If I go out and do duplicates, I can do 50 duplicates, and that's way too many rocks. I can do 10 duplicates. Now you're starting to get the idea here. You may have to keep increasing it until you're pretty happy with it. But that allows you to go in and create a series of rocks along a given area without having to do copy, paste, copy, and so forth. Now notice that quite a few of them are kind of they're hidden. The majority of them are hidden. But now what you can do is go ahead and lift them up. They're not attached to that piece. And that was because of the settings that I had. Use distribution object. And they're instanced. So that should help you when you go to create some rock masses. And create rock walls. You can do that right inside along your riverbanks and create some elaborate theming there. Now while we're here, let's go ahead and do the next section. And that is using the AEC Extended Primitives within this program. Go to Create, Geometry, and at the very bottom you'll see AEC Extended. And we have foliage. there's some default trees in here that you can use. Now I know what you're probably thinking, oh, I can create an entire forest using trees in the scatter method, and I highly recommend not doing that. Simply because the trees are geometry based. So if I do that and I click here, that puts a tree, and that tree is very large. It is geometry based, which means all of these little branches and all of these leaves are geometry, and that is going to severely lower, or I shouldn't say lower, increase the polygon faces in your scene, slowing it down. Now, if your primary focus, your shot has a tree in it, in which you're going to see in the final render, I recommend leaving it at the highest quality. However, when you do clone, be careful, make sure you save, hold shift to do your clone. You can do an instance or a copy. If we do a copy, we can go into its properties and change its seed. So I'll do a seed of 500. Notice that the branches changed. I can also remove, and this is kind of a fun thing, the branches and the trunk. And all that really gives me is the leaves, so that's cutting down on the polygon, and that's good for distance shots. Trees that have that are in the background that you don't really need to see the branches and whatnot. And let's go ahead and we'll do a render and we'll take a look at the two of them. This does slow your rendering down, so this may be one of the things. Don't add trees until the very end when your scene is completely set. But you'll notice here that really this one doesn't look too much, too much different than this one, other than you do see a little bit missing. But if the trees are not the focus of your project, by all means, remove what you can from them. So there are tons of different types. You can go ahead and cut the densities down too of the leaves, so that it maybe it doesn't that cuts down on the amount as well. Pruning, all right, which is kind of a weird thing, but for the most part, go ahead and play around with the AEC Extended Primitives. Drop those in, hide them, but try not to use the scatter command on it. I really think you're going to be asking for trouble there because of the polygon count. Still a couple more steps to completing a 3D landscape. You may or may not elect to put the sun out in the sky, and that's I'm not going to cover that with you today, but you just put it pretty much put a sphere out there with a self-illuminating material on it, and you can actually use video post to make that glow as if it was like a yellow sun up in the sky. But what I do want to show you here is clouds. And that, of course, is going to be something that I would like you to use only because it makes the sky look more realistic. I'm going to hide the dome again. If I can get it here. Hide the selection. And I'm going to create geometry. And actually you'll see helpers. Down the list is atmospheric apparatus, so it's create, measuring tape, which is helpers, and atmospheric apparatus. I'm going to use a sphere gizmo. Now, I know it's not common, you shouldn't be dropping things into camera view, but I'm going to do it here just for the heck of it. And you'll notice that I can't even see it. I have to bring it over here and move it to wherever my view is anyway. So we'll come over here and just drop it just in the middle of the sky here. And if I was to make this a cloud right now, clouds are not perfect circles. I always like to give it a little bit of definition here, more like an M&M type of surface, maybe even something like that. Now, an atmospheric apparatus is a helper. It will not show up in the rendering, but what it will do for you is it will contain our next effect, and that's going to be under rendering, environment, and under the atmosphere we'll add volume fog. Once we add volume fog, we have to define what gizmo, and that of course is picking this gizmo here. Some things about gizmos here: we got the soften gizmo edges. That means that It's sort of like the gradient between the atmosphere and then the not outside of the gizmo. So we want to soften the edges here by like 1. As much as possible, because we don't want it the cloud just to stop at the end of the gizmo. We want to kind of have a fade. Clouds are white, and in a little bit we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you why we would change the color on them. We'll just hit exponential and we'll just go with that right now. We'll do a quick render and we'll see what happens with the default settings. Now I'm missing the sky, but just from looking at the sky, what you see is you got this blotch up here, and that's white fog, and that's going to make it cloud. So we can do a couple different things here. One, we could go ahead and extend that out and just fill it with fog, and let's try that. We'll take our gizmo and kind of stretch it out a little bit here, but we're going to mess with some settings. Density is how thick the fog is, or how thick the clouds are, so I'm going to increase the thickness of the clouds. I'm also going to go up and do fractal. And at this point, we have to define the size. And that's where we'll start to see how much cloud happens. I'm going to cut the size down. We'll do a render. And let's open up the sky here. Now our gizmo is slightly coming out of the sky now. So we're going to go ahead and scale that down a little bit and move it inside the sky. Like right over top of us. How about that? We'll do a render and see where we are. Okay, it's starting to look pretty good there. It's kind of blotched all over the place there. Very inconsistent. Now you're probably again asking, why don't we just put a picture of clouds up there? And the fact is that then we have to worry about, as the camera moves around the scene, catching making those clouds so they look real. A picture of a cloud will look good in a still rendering, but in an animation it will not. We could probably scale that up a little bit more, thicken it out a little bit more. I like thick clouds. And then what you can pretty much do is just copy several of these gizmos around your scene so that you have clouds throughout the surface, throughout the area. Now, this isn't really bad looking at all. I'm pretty happy with it. But there's one little step that I would consider trying. So, here's what I'd like you to do. Take the fog gizmo, hold shift. Let's find it here in the side view. We're stretched out in a very odd way here, so let's do this. Go like that. Take and hold shift and clone the gizmo. Now what you'll notice is we still only have one fog volume fog. So pretty much what we want to do is create a second one. Now they're both, by default, this gizmo is containing both fog, but we want to change one. So I'm going to add another volume fog. That volume fog, I want to have the same exact settings. I'm going to pick the second gizmo. So it's gizmo 2. I want 100% or 100 on the soften, exponential. My 67.4 on the density, so we'll try that again. 67.4. I think we had fractal. Let's bounce back and forth here. We'll see. See, we had fractal with a size of, we'll do just 15 for argument's sake here. A fractal of 15. So they both should be the same. Okay. But this time I'm going to change my color to a darker gray. When I hit render, see if you can notice the difference. What we have is a little bit of shade down there now, which giving the clouds a little bit more illusion as if there's darkness underneath. Let's play around with some more of those settings here. Okay, so we got our white fog is on the top. Let's cut the density down there a little bit. The bottom fog, We're just making a lot darker. Now I'll do this just to kind of exaggerate what's happening here. And what you're seeing now is that you've got the dark clouds on the bottom, the light clouds on the top. That's giving you the illusion that the sunlight up in the sky is not hitting the bottom of the clouds, which is a very realistic feel. If you're doing like a clouds rolling in or a storm coming in or whatnot, you want to give it that illusion that the sun, the ambient light, is not lighting up the clouds. If you do that, you want to make sure all your clouds have that. Finally, let's put some sunlight in. Now, sunlight, probably the most trickiest of all, can be achieved several different ways. If you're using a scanline rendering, which we shouldn't be because we're using mentor materials, you could use the skylight in the standard materials, which uses light tracer, and unfortunately that will not work in this scene in mental ray. We could just go and be very basic and do a standard spotlight. Free spot. I'll explain the method to my madness here. Now we want to really increase the amount. We want to turn on shadows. We want to increase the amount of the parameters so that it really covers the whole scene. Okay, just overshoot. Now, one of the problems that you have when you start using lights like this is that because your sky is an object, the light's going to react funny with it. So let's see what we get here when we hit that. Okay, we're starting to see some shadow casting of the trees. Looks like the water's brighter. For the most part, I'm pretty happy with it. You could use some additional omnis to get the shadows that you wish, but the only other thing I might do is take this color, take this actual light, under its intensity color attenuation, throw a little bit of yellow in there. Brighten it just a little bit more. Now that might be a little extreme. I think I might have went a little too bright there because I'm starting to get washout on my materials. It does look like a pretty sunny day though, and if you throw some trees in here and fill this rendering, you might get a little bit better illusion here. But there we go. That is pretty much one attempt at making a 3D landscape. I